Now, do you have trouble to stay disciplined and to focus on work to get those key things done? And wouldn't it be cool if you could just make yourself addicted to work, so that work becomes as immersive as video games or your favorite hobby, maybe? And the truth is, if you manage dopamine release in your brain correctly, you can. You can, in fact, enter that state of deep immersion and extreme focus that is also known as the zone or flow. We can all do it. You can do it. So let's find out how. Welcome, everybody. My name is Niklas, and I'm a neuroscientist and a high performance coach who specializes on psychology and good old flow. And in this video, I will give you a full understanding of why it is so hard to get and stay deeply focused. And I will give you some insight into neurobiology and what you can do to turn yourself into a working machine. So, first, we will look at the production of the feel good and pleasure neurochemical dopamine and also the involved brain networks so that you know what is actually going on in the brain because knowledge is power. And second, I will cover what flow actually is, how dopamine is involved in it, and most importantly, why you want to get into flow on command to crush your work and career with ease. And third, I will also explain why most of us have such trouble to focus on our work in the first place. And if this dopamine detox trend you probably heard about actually works, or if it's just a fad. And yeah, as a bonus for those future high performers of you that stick to the end, I will also give you some simple actionable tips that you can apply right now to improve your focus and to get into flow with work so that you procrastinate less and get things done, of course. So, as always, if you liked the video, please give it a like, subscribe if you haven't, and click the notification bell because this will help to make the channel grow and we can, of course, build a community of high performance together. So, that's it. Let's do this. Alright, so generally, dopamine is a pleasure and reward neurochemical. And when it's released in the brain, dopamine has a few quite interesting effects. And the one that you probably know is that dopamine makes you feel good. Again, dopamine is a pleasure and a reward neurochemical, and that means that the brain releases dopamine to reward you for doing something. For example, when you tick off a task on your to-do list, you get that little burst of dopamine and you feel good about doing the task. And other things like that could, for example, be that you eat some tasty food, you get dopamine, maybe you have sex, you get dopamine from that, makes you feel good, etc. So what dopamine also does is that dopamine enhances focus, attention, and even learning and creativity. So the more dopamine and activity are released in your brain, the more you are sucked into this activity. Again, dopamine is focus enhancing. For example, if you read a thrilling book and you just can't take your eyes off of this book, then it means that lots of dopamine is released in your brain. And all of the dopamine, it increases your attention and focus on the text. And of course, since you're so deeply engaged in the book, you also learn and remember what you read very well. So that's another effect that dopamine has. Now, in contrast, if you compare it to a boring maths book, for example, it probably doesn't excite you very much, and it doesn't release any dopamine in your brain. And of course, that's why it is so hard to focus on a freaking maths book. And well, should maths book excite you, then good for you, weirdo. That's actually quite cool. Anyhow, another thing dopamine does, and that's besides making you feel good, increasing your focus, attention, learning, and memory, is that it increases motivation, and it also makes addictive, or it makes you addictive. And that's really not a joke. For example, in the 1950s, there were pleasure experiments with rats, and in these experiments, an electrode was placed into the rat's brain, and the rats could then press a lever to stimulate the brain areas that are pretty much activated by dopamine. And guess what happened? Pressing the lever felt so good for the mice and was so addictive that some mice pressed the lever over 7,500 times in 12 hours. That was pretty much documented in those studies. And some rats, they even starved to death because the rat pressed his freaking lever instead of wasting time to eat. So that's how crazy addictive dopamine can be. And I mean, just think about video gaming, for example. It releases massive amounts of dopamine, and that's why you just can't stop doing it, why it's so addictive. Again, the dopamine from video gaming, it motivates you. It motivates you to do more video gaming in the future, and that is again why it causes addiction. And to be honest, I actually used to game a lot back in school, pretty much every single day for hours, and I literally spent all of my free time for it. And sometimes I would even get up earlier in the morning, on the weekends, just to play longer. And yeah, good old times. But nowadays, I obviously get my dopamine from other things, such as academic writing for my PhD studies, from cooking, in fact, and a few other things. But more about that later. All right. So let's move on to the next step and have a look at the dopamine pathways in the brain, because there are multiple ones, as you can see on the image here. And generally, what you need to know is that there are two main areas with dopamine producing neurons in the brain. And the first one is one known as the ventral tegmental area, VTA. And the second brain area is called the substantia nigra. Now there are also some dopamine neurons in the arcuate nucleus of the hypothalamus, but I won't cover these today because it's not really relevant for what we are interested in. And again, what we are really interested in, that is the reward pathway, of course. It's shown in blue on this image here. It's also known as the mesolimbic pathway. So I just flipped it in for you. Ventral tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens are part of this mesolimbic pathway. And over this pathway, again, dopamine is pretty much produced in the VTA, the ventral tegmental area, and then sent across to the nucleus accumbens. And another thing is that the nucleus accumbens, it's also connected to other brain regions, such as the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the center of long-term memory, and the amygdala. Now, the amygdala is the emotional center. That's where decision making takes place. So again, let's just say you eat a delicious piece of cake, and this would then cause the production of some dopamine in the ventral tegmental area. And dopamine again is then delivered to the nucleus accumbens. And the nucleus accumbens, when it gets dopamine, then it activates the hippocampus on the one hand. That makes you learn and memorize what the cake actually looked like. It makes you memorize the way to the bakery and where the bakery actually was. So it improves your memory of the pleasurable event. And what also happens is that the nucleus accumbens activates the amygdala, and the amygdala makes you feel good. So that's where this nice feeling from dopamine comes from. All right, so now that we have that out of the way, another dopamine pathway is the one in yellow, also known as the mesocortical pathway. So again, I flipped it in for you. And across this pathway, dopamine again is produced in the ventral tegmental area and delivered to various other brain regions. The important one would be the prefrontal cortex that you can see it there. And the prefrontal cortex is involved in long-term planning, goal-directed thinking, and executing tasks. So if we go back to the example of the delicious cake, then that would mean that, again, the dopamine release in the prefrontal cortex would tell us, hey, in the future, let's plan to go to this amazing bakery again, and let's get the cake again. Again, prefrontal cortex, long-term planning. Now next, we have the nigrostriatal pathway, which is in orange. And again, I flipped in for you. And over this pathway, dopamine is transported to the putamen. The putamen is part of the dorsal striatum, just for your information. So what the hell does this pathway do? This pathway is actually not involved in reward, but it's needed for coordination, motor function, and to initiate movements. For example, you need dopamine release in the putamen to move your arm, just to move your arm up, to initiate movements, and to move your muscles. And guess what? In Parkinson's disease, 50 to 80% of the dopamine neurons in the substantia nigra are in fact dead. They are dead when you see the first motor issues appear. So when they have trouble to start moving, when they can't use their facial muscles to smile anymore, or some Parkinson's patients also show bradykinesia, which means that they just suddenly freeze and can't move anymore, again because dopamine is lacking, or they just move extremely slowly. One of my room flatmates back then, he actually had his grandpa had Parkinson's, and I can tell you, it took him 20 minutes to literally walk 3 meters. I'm not kidding. I'm really not kidding. So I wanted to point this out because personally I've done some Parkinson's research as a visiting researcher, and just real quick, I looked at whether the hunger hormone ghrelin and another gut hormone called GLP-1 can protect the dopamine-producing brain cells during Parkinson's disease. And yeah, lastly, just for your information, there's also a last pathway, the tubero-infundibular pathway. It's in dark red there. So this one is involved in hormone release, prolactin and a few other hormones. But again, for the sake of this video, let's skip that one. All right, let's move on to the next point. What the hell is flow? Now, flow is the most productive and, in fact, most pleasurable state in existence. And again, just imagine how addictive and life-shortening, in fact, video games are. And I mean this literally, because in flow, the prefrontal cortex, again, that's the part of our brain that's responsible for logical thought, planning and executing tasks, is inactivated. And because the prefrontal cortex is inactivated, we literally merge with the task and the moment. We forget who we are and even our sense of time. Because again, all of these things happen in this brain area. And that is why 5 hours of video gaming can feel like 5 minutes. And the moment flow ends and you pop back into consciousness, you might realize you need to hit the bathroom, for example, or that you're hungry, maybe. Now, why am I mentioning flow, you ask? Because again, flow, or this state of deep immersion, it not only feels amazing, but it also increases your focus and your attention by 200%. And because flow also elevates your productivity by 500% and your creativity by 430%. Bear with me now. Just imagine that your daily work, for example, writing that assignment, making a business presentation, etc., whatever it is, would get you into flow. Just imagine you would get into flow doing these things. If you learn this and you can get yourself into flow every time you work, you would literally be unstoppable. I mean it, because a 500% increase in productivity would mean that you get 5 days of work done in a single day. Doesn't it sound amazing? So again, if you agree, just drop me a flow to go in the comments and let me know if you want more flow or other productivity videos, because again, the goal is to get you as productive as possible. Productive as hell, that is. And most importantly, and you might have guessed it at this point, and that is that flow needs dopamine. Now, the key to enter flow is again dopamine, along with a little bit of the stress hormone norepinephrine, which is also called adrenaline. And you need both, so both have to be released in your brain. And that's why tasks that release massive amounts of dopamine in your brain. They could be delicious foods, gaming, it could be gambling, it could even be shopping, porn, masturbation, social media, whatever. All of these things release massive amounts of dopamine, and they literally get you hooked up very easily, and they get you into flow very easily as well. And that aside, as a side note for you, thrill and novelty also get you into flow quickly. And this is also one of the reasons why flow is very common in extreme sports. So you probably heard stories about those crazy adrenaline junkies, etc. And in their case, again, it's the dopamine. The dopamine that's released that makes them so addicted to risking their lives in the extreme sports. Now, getting into flow with video gaming, like it did for me in the past, probably doesn't do much for your career, except if you're a video game reviewer or developer, perhaps. So, to become a high performer, you need to learn to get your dopamine rewards and flow, that is, from completing the work that you do day in and day out. And of course, the question now is, how do you do that? Because a big problem is that nowadays, when our brain is regularly hit by a lot of dopamine from gaming, gambling, shopping, and whatever else, uh, then we don't want to do things that produce less dopamine, that are less engaging, that are less stimulating. And again, when you have the choice between answering messages on your phone, releases tons of dopamine, and doing boring work, releases almost nothing, almost no dopamine, then you would obviously choose your phone because it creates more of the pleasure chemical dopamine and because that's neurobiology. That's natural. And that's where the idea of dopamine detox comes in. So dopamine detox means that you resensitize to dopamine. So what you do is that you remove all potential sources or stimuli, all potential dopamine sources in your life. No social media, no YouTube, no Netflix, no caffeine, again also stimulation, no energy drinks, no music, no gambling, no porn, you name it. You could even reduce food stimuli by starting to fast. You could use less seasonings for your foods, etc. Overall, let me say that there's actually no scientific evidence for the fact that dopamine detox increases your dopamine sensitivity. No evidence whatsoever. But those that try dopamine detoxing, they report that they can focus easier on their work. There are reasons for that. In any case, for those interested in high performance, pay close attention now, because the key to become addicted to work is to learn to be bored. The key to become addicted to work is to learn to be bored. Alright? Because if you are bored and you have no other options than reading a book, writing an assignment for work, etc., suddenly gets exciting. Because the little bit of dopamine that you get when you read an exciting book, when you finish your assignment, that will now be your only and main source of dopamine. And again, suddenly, work will feel amazing. So, how do you do it? The secret is not to just cut out things that trigger this extreme dopamine release, but you also need to do activities that release even less dopamine than work does. Let me repeat that. You need to do activities, boring activities, that release even less dopamine than work. So, again, besides hiding your phone, which is actually a high performance habit, a great thing that you can do is wall staring. I'm serious. Just stare at a freaking wall for 10 minutes or just do nothing for an evening. And the reason being is that this will train you to get used to be unstimulated. You have to learn to be bored. You have to learn to be unstimulated. What you could also do is you could take a 20 to 30-minute walk, maybe without music, again, no or low stimulation. You could meditate, very useful, etc. So whatever you do, once you are used to staying in this unstimulated state, and once you don't need the constant stimulation from social media, your emails, eating snacks every hour, etc., once you don't need all of that stuff anymore, then becomes so much easier to focus. Trust me, when the video games disappear from your life, all of a sudden you will be productive as hell. So with better focus on work, on the things that matter, again, you will be more productive. You will complete more and more assignments. And as you complete more and more assignments for your work, you get dopamine from it. Again, every task that you finish gives you a little bit of dopamine. And this dopamine will then eventually help you to get into flow with work. And again, dopamine also makes you feel great, makes you even more productive. And finally, you will get addicted to work because again, you decided dopamine. So, in a nutshell, first and foremost, don't get your dopamine reward from pleasurable things. Try to cut these things out or limit them. That's the idea of dopamine detox. So they can only, let's say you only schedule 30 minutes of Netflix, YouTube, etc. at the end of the day. Or maybe you check your social media only in the evening at a set time. And always do this after work. Very important. And the second thing that might be even more important is that you need to learn to be bored. You need to learn to be non-stimulated. So just do things that release even less dopamine than work, such as wall staring or just doing nothing for an evening, to make work addictive. Because again, in comparison to doing nothing and wall staring, work is actually really interesting. So that's the way you can make work your main source of dopamine. And that's how you can become addicted to it. All right. And I hope that the video has been informative and useful for you. So please let me know in the comments. And also let me know what else you would like to see next. Again, the goal is to get you as productive as possible. And for those of you who are interested, I will also link a video about how to beat procrastination and how to adjust the challenge skills balance in your favor. Because the point is that you need to be challenged to get into flow as well. And to quote flow researcher Stephen Kotler, a task must be hard enough to make you stretch, but not so hard that you snap. All of that out of the way, I have some homework for you today. So think about the top 3 addictive and pleasurable things in your life. It could be, let's say, this little phony of yours, for example. It could be YouTube, it could be Netflix, it could be emails, whatever is addictive to you and pleasurable to you, high dopamine releasing. And again, strictly limit these things. Limit it to maybe 30 minutes in the evening, always after work, or just cut them out entirely. The second homework for you will to try some wall staring. Just stare at the wall for 10 minutes. And ideally you do this before you start working. Alright guys, embrace the boredom because it will make you shit as hell. Anyhow, high performers and those on the way to become one, see you in the next video. Have a good week.